The flames are rising in the east. The once great empires are reduced to ashes and the lands are soaked with blood. A new power has risen in the chaos, a power unlike any other, led by a man whose name would become synonymous with terror, and his thirst for blood is unquenchable. His name was Genghis Khan, and this is the bloody age of Genghis Khan. Our story begins in the deserts of Mongolia, where several nomadic tribes lived rather primitive lives, warring amongst themselves and with their neighbors over precious resources such as food and water. These tribes were collectively known as the Mongols, and despite their lack of centralized rule, they were experts in horsemanship and archery, and were very fierce when it came to battle. They were a force to be reckoned with even if they couldn't unite. That is until a young boy named Temujin was born. Temujin's birth name isn't actually known, and the name Genghis is an honorific meaning ocean or righteous. He was born into the Borjigit clan of the Mongol Empire, and his father, Yesugei, was a chieftain of the clan. However, tragedy struck early as Temujin's father was poisoned by rival Tatars at an assembly of tribal leaders when he was just 9 years old. With his father gone, Temujin and his family were forced into a life of hardship, and they faced constant threats from rival clans who saw them as easy prey. But Temujin was not one to simply submit to his fate. As a young man, he displayed remarkable courage and leadership skills. In one instance, Temujin and his brother were captured by rival Tatars, but Temujin managed to escape while his brother stayed captured. This event deeply affected him and fueled his desire for vengeance against those who had wronged him and his family. When Temujin returned to his clan, he found that his mother had married one of his father's former allies, a man named Kublai. Despite this, Temujin respected his stepfather and began to build a reputation as a skilled warrior. Temujin married a woman named Porte, and together they had a son. But tragedy struck again when his father-in-law, who was a rival chieftain, was killed in battle. Temujin was forced to flee with his wife and child, but these hardships only made Temujin more determined to succeed. He continued to hone his skills as a warrior and strategist, and he began to forge alliances with other clans, uniting the Mongols under his banner. One of the key factors in Temujin's rise to power was his ability to unite the Mongol tribes. At this time, the Mongols were divided into several small clans that were constantly fighting each other. But Temujin was able to bring them together under his banner and create a sense of common identity. He also introduced the concept of religious tolerance, which appealed to the diverse range of religious beliefs among the Mongols. Temujin also implemented a merit-based social system, which allowed individuals to rise in rank based on their abilities and loyalty rather than their birth status. This appealed to many Mongols who were tired of the traditional system that limited opportunities based on birth. Another important factor was Temujin's military genius. He was a brilliant strategist and tactician who was able to defeat larger and more powerful armies. One of his most famous victories was the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223, where he defeated a combined force of Russian and Kipchak armies despite being outnumbered. Temujin's military success was due to a number of factors, including his innovative use of cavalry, his ability to exploit his opponent's weaknesses, and his willingness to take risks. For example, Temujin was one of the first leaders to use gunpowder weapons such as cannons and rockets. He also excelled in psychological warfare, which involved intimidating his opponents and undermining their morale before battle. As Temujin's power grew, so did his enemies. The Khwarezmid Empire, a powerful Central Asian state, posed a significant threat to the Mongols. After Temujin defeated the Taijute clan, they fled to the Khwarezmid Empire for protection. Enraged, Temujin assembled his army and marched on the Khwarezmid capital of Samarkand. The city's impressive walls intimidated his soldiers, but Temujin devised a plan to overcome this obstacle. While one group of soldiers distracted the enemy, another group secretly dug tunnels under the city walls. Eventually, the tunnels were complete, and the Mongols were able to sneak into the city and open the gates for the rest of the army. The Khwarezmid ruler, Shah Muhammad II, tried to flee but was captured and executed. Temujin had taken Samarkand, and the news of his victory spread far and wide. After conquering Khwarezmia, Genghis Khan turned his attention to the Western Xia dynasty, a Chinese-influenced state that had been resisting Mongol rule. Genghis Khan was determined to crush the Western Xia once and for all, and he assembled a massive army of over 100,000 men to lay siege to the Western Xia capital of Yinchuan. Despite the city's strong defenses, the Mongols were able to withstand the heat and use their superior numbers to eventually capture the city. The Western Xia emperor was captured and executed, and the dynasty was officially brought to an end. However, not all was well within Genghis Khan's empire. While he had successfully conquered vast territories, he had also faced opposition from within his own ranks. Many of his generals and advisors had become increasingly ambitious and were not content with the spoils they had already received. In particular, Genghis Khan's brother, Belgu, had grown envious of his success and had plotted to overthrow him. Belgu gathered a group of loyalists and launched a surprise attack on Genghis Khan's camp. But the attempt was ultimately unsuccessful, and Belgu was executed along with his supporters. This event left Genghis Khan disillusioned and paranoid, and he began to suspect that his other generals were also plotting against him. Despite the challenges he faced, Genghis Khan continued to expand his empire. He conquered the Kara-Khitai Khanate, a Turkic state that controlled parts of Central Asia and China. He also launched an invasion of the Jin dynasty, a Chinese kingdom that had resisted Mongol rule for decades. However, as Genghis Khan's empire grew, so did the resentment of the people he had conquered. Many of the subjects in his vast empire chafed under Mongol rule and began to plot rebellions. In particular, the Khwarezmians, who had suffered greatly under Mongol rule, were eager to overthrow their conquerors. In 1227, a group of Khwarezmians assassinated Genghis Khan during a campaign against the Western Shah dynasty. Although Genghis Khan's empire was vast and powerful, it was not destined to last. The succession crisis that followed his death plunged the empire into chaos, and the ambitious generals who had once helped him conquer vast territories now turned on each other to carve out their own pieces of the empire. The once mighty Mongol army was torn apart by infighting, and the dream of a unified empire was shattered. But what made Genghis Khan so ruthless? Why was he able to commit such atrocities in the name of his empire? Some historians argue that Genghis Khan's ruthlessness was a product of his nomadic upbringing. The harsh conditions of the Mongolian steppe and the constant threat of war and famine created a society that valued strength and ruthlessness above all else. From a young age, Genghis Khan was taught to be a fierce warrior, and he was willing to do whatever it took to succeed. Others argue that Genghis Khan's ruthlessness was a product of his personal experiences. He had suffered greatly at the hands of his enemies, and this fueled his desire for revenge and conquest. When his father was poisoned by rival Tatars, young Temujin swore to avenge his death. And when he and his brother were captured by the same Tatars, Temujin's determination to never be taken captive again only grew. These personal experiences shaped Genghis Khan into the ruthless leader he became. Genghis Khan was indeed a brilliant military strategist and leader. He was a visionary who was able to unite the Mongol tribes under one banner and create a sense of common identity. He was also a skilled warrior and tactician who was able to defeat larger and more powerful armies. Genghis Khan's empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, making it one of the largest empires in history. He also implemented policies that promoted religious tolerance and merit-based social mobility, which contributed to the stability and prosperity of his empire. However, it's important to also acknowledge the negative aspects of Genghis Khan's legacy. He was also known for his brutality and ruthlessness, and his empire was built on conquest and subjugation. He was responsible for the deaths of millions of people, and his invasions caused widespread destruction and devastation. It's important to have a balanced perspective and acknowledge both the positive and negative aspects of his legacy. Thank you for watching.